Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and we got another solo album review here. The debut album from Charli Adams, Bullseye. It's not that I'm surprised that we got here, but rather that it took so long to do so. And to explain some of that, we briefly have to talk about genre, specifically coming out of the 2000s revival that is now very much in full swing. Specifically an intersection point that hasn't happened as often as you might expect. Now the first genre is, no surprise, emo, which picked up a bit more of a pop sheen throughout the 2000s, to the point where a lot of purists would argue the bands tagged with the label, they weren't even emo. But it was also a male-dominated genre for the most part. In many cases it still kind of is, and that's in sharper contrast to the second subgenre that picked up a lot of steam in the 2000s, especially in the mainstream, pop rock predominantly fronted by women, who embraced a rougher, more authentic sound and approach to the songwriting in contrast with the bubblegum era around the turn of the millennium. And I always found myself a little bit surprised there wasn't more crossover. A lot of women who can embrace the sharply layered, confessional edges of emo songwriting while still maintaining a lot of that pop sheen for the crossover. Yes, of course there was Paramore, and they've proven remarkably influential today, proving there was a market for it, but you would think there would be more than just them among the success stories of the era. There was certainly room for them. But I'll admit, for as much as I like the many waves of emo, I personally really appreciate when the genre expands to encompass more sounds to go with that style of writing. From the balancing act of 2000s era emo rap to the hit and miss success of trap crossovers today. And then there's all the country fusions coming out of Nashville, epitomized by Ruston Kelly's breakout, but I still remember when his now ex-wife Casey Musgraves talked about going down that road herself. And of course we're now seeing acts that bring in a brighter pop sheen coming out of the indie scene. I've gone on at length about how Jetty Bones' theatrical blend of shimmering brightness with pitch dark subject matter really works for me, but really you can look at a lot of the modern acts that appeal to Gen Z as having a lot of emo signifiers, especially in all the introspection and the angst, and especially in the past couple of years. And right into that mix, enter Charli Adams, a singer-songwriter from Alabama who moved to Nashville that I became familiar with through Headspace, a non-single that just so happened to be a collaboration with Ruston Kelly. In my song review on Instagram and TikTok, I thought the track was pretty great, and I was intrigued how she seemed to meet the intersection of Americana-infused indie pop with a lot of heartfelt introspection that had a distinctly emo feel in the writing. Hell, the opening song on this debut album is called Emo Lullaby with an emoji, so I was absolutely curious where the hell this album would go. So what did we get? Well, we got an album that's both deceptively easy and kind of complicated to talk about, where the comparison point might be less Jetty Bones and more Lydia Loveless, circa Real or Daughter. And even that feels a little bit off, not just in how Adams' tones have a fair bit more shimmer and propulsive atmosphere, but also how her writing style and vantage point feels younger, having perhaps lived just as hard, but her perspective isn't quite as world-weary, and that changes the feel of the project. Hell, I'd almost place some of this as a contemporary to what Olivia Rodrigo was delivering this year, especially in song structure and writing style, but Bullseye does feel a little older than sour, laser targeting the drifting, heartbroken miasma of your early 20s, with more impressive production and hooks, and especially the writing, which is why the big reason I'm about to tell you this is one of the best albums of 2021. A stellar debut that completely caught me off guard just how hard it hit for me. Now granted, I do tend to praise all the acts I listed a little bit more than most, but given how I can tell I'm not really the direct target audience for this project, for it to still work the way it does, it's a testament to quality, should you choose to give it the chance. Now, I do think this is an album you kind of have to give a chance, because while it gripped me very quickly, I can see how for some, they might question how much is really here, so let's address what some might perceive as flaws quickly from the start. Some of this comes with the shorter song structure. This is an album that runs just under 40 minutes, and it feels like it runs faster. Nice change of pace for emo-leaning material, which can occasionally drag, but let's be real, it's not like the scattered mosaic of textures that Adams brings don't show their influence, from the gleaming 80s pastiche of the synths and the gated drums across the middle of the album, to the more 2000s pop rock tones with the watery guitars and more defined grooves that bookend it. Now, I would argue that all of these influences, they don't really feel derivative to me, given some other choices in production, composition, and especially with Adams' soft-spoken, husky delivery that feels very modern. But if there's gonna be something that will hold folks back from truly embracing this album, it might be Adams as a performer, as a singer. Not that she's bad by any means. She's a very solid singer who picks up some really pretty vocal arrangements, and like with that last Lucy Dacus album, I really like how she uses more synthetic vocal filters to highlight a lot of numb depression and separation from the world around her. But like with Ruston Kelly, it does lend the album a wistful sort of heaviness that doesn't always complement a sense of immediacy. It might not immediately grab you. And to be blunt, I'm not sure the pure pop moments have the punch to work as well as her best songs here. Get High With My Friends has a lot of that watery twinkle and more propulsive groove. Obvious single choice is obvious. And remember, Cloverland is pure retro synthwave and honestly sounds pretty damn good for it. But they also feel a little bit undercooked in the composition to match her best emotional gut punches. Maybe it has to do with the shorter length of the songs, but I do feel like they could have been a little bit more anthemic, and I'm just not sure that's in Charli Adams' arsenal just yet, even if I think the production would help her get there. And yet, that's about where my pointed criticisms of this album end, because if you let Bullseye sit with you, it will grab hold and will not let go. Yeah, the influences in her sound might be pretty obvious, but it reminds me a bit of Kyle Craft in that the combination of sounds never feels derivative, and there's a diversity to her tones that will definitely keep your interest. That's why I like that pop sheen. The album might start off a little slow, courtesy of the watery guitars and the synthetic vocal production enhancing that numb feeling, but Cheer Captain packs a wallop with all the sputtering snarl left in, which only expands into the shimmering groove and the beautiful buzzy arrangement of Didn't Make It, which hits that precise warping balance of fractured at its core, but still able to capture the full swell of the mix that does all wonders for extending the emotional drama here. It reminds me of the best of modern Bon Iver, or coincidentally, whenever Taylor Swift adopted that formula last year, but again, it doesn't feel derivative of either, and yet that compositional formula, it works wonders between the brittle sputters of Headspace opposite the synths imported straight from mid to late 80s Americana, to the more contemporary new wave of Jokes on You, I Don't Want To, that could easily fit alongside Church's Best, albeit with a little bit more rollick to it, to all the beautiful acoustic atmospherics on Bother With Me, with a short guitar solo where I could swear that guitar tone was designed to evoke the solo on Fix You by Coldplay, and that's a compliment. I should also mention the guest stars here as well. Both Ruston Kelly and Nightly frontman Jonathan Capecci, they are natural counter voices to the relationship drama that they describe, and they fit perfectly. But I was most impressed by how Novo Amor fills in the background of 17 Again. Just how well the song opens up with its nostalgic scope that just nails that distant warmth of memory. It's also one of the few places where I actually like where the studio chatter was left in for that outro, which is a necessary pullback to reality. And I'll say it, the album ends with its heaviest moment on the title track. The guitars are rougher, pulling back to the 90s and 2000s influences, makes it feel more contemporary. The groove really kicks up. And even if the guitars might roar a little bit heavier, it lands precisely on the note of not quite certain confrontation that the album's been building towards its entire runtime. It's a great final climax. And that takes us to the content, where I think this album truly hits some stunning moments, and where I think the Lydia Lovelace comparison fits most appropriately here, especially when it comes to framing. That reminds me a lot of 2016's Real, which, if you don't remember, was one of my favorite albums of the 2010s. Because while this album has more moments of emo depression that slide into that territory with self-destructive behavior and pervasive angst, Charli Adams is also self-aware enough to not really give herself a pass, nor frame herself as an entirely reliable narrator. Yeah, some of the guys here come across as complete assholes. The musician boyfriend living down to every awful stereotype on Cheer Captain, the rich douche who won't stop bragging on Jokes on You, I Don't Want To. But in the former track, she openly questions why she's attracted to it, why she doesn't speak up more, why she's so much of a people pleaser. And the latter track, that's that great line, I Don't Even Want You to Change, where she's claimed enough self-confidence to step back away from his dive-bar projections and pushy attitude. But there is a part of her that wound up there in the first place, and that is telling. And these are the songs that are sandwiched alongside tracks of unrequited love that really do cut. Didn't Make It's a prime example, where you can tell that both partners were trying so damn hard to make it work in their teenage years, and it just didn't come together. And the follow-up on Headspace with Ruston Kelly, where both partners are imploding for parallel reasons and yet can't quite shake out of it. It is a masterstroke of balance in trying to deal with somebody who's going through depression. And that falls through onto Maybe Could Have Loved, where he might be petty and cheating and she might be detached and refusing to open up, but the key lines on the hook: whatever happened to loving someone long enough to hurt someone. It follows a similar arc of an album like Real, because the through line of emotional logic, it's so defined, it's so robust, but it also doesn't really tilt into the melodrama, because you can understand why Charli Adams is acting the way she does, or it all just makes a sad sort of sense, and it can feel relatable in some really touching moments. And part of this is also established very early on with Emo Lullaby, which features her in therapy, where at the end of each verse she apologizes for oversharing because she feels like she should have already resolved some of these issues in her teenage years. She should know where she's going, and paired with the utterly devastating line, "Haven't called my friends in a while, wonder if they miss me." The loneliness just feels palpable. And she does recognize the roots of some of these dramas on Cheer Captain and how she's been conditioned to be the good girl and the people pleaser, but she yearns to live on a path that would take her away from all of that, even if embracing some of that passion will bring all the more heartache. It's why every failed relationship stings, because she knows she wants or deserves better and doesn't want to have to settle for worse. So when something that could work goes awry, it hurts all the more. It's why I'm convinced that Bother With Me bringing in that guitar solo is reminiscent of Fix You. It had to be intentional. She's wondering how she's broken. Maybe she's too jaded or stubborn. She just wants to be wanted. Maybe even wants to be fixed. And there's a reason why I don't mind the retreat into nostalgia on Remember Cloverland and 17 Again. Mostly because it's therapeutic to find escapism in Friends and Freedom, but also because she knows it's just an echo. She knows it won't last. She's got to keep moving forward. And that leads into the title track, which might as well be the thesis statement of the album. She's found enough confidence to stare down the immensely flawed paternal figures ahead of her in both men and maybe even God, where she acknowledges their flaws and her attraction to them, but she's got her eye on a bigger prize. She's not there yet, but for now, she can shoot true. Folks, this was an album I did not want to put down. In a backdrop of dreamy passion that she'll keep on spending until she strikes gold, Charli Adams put out the sort of captivating, varied, and yet grounded and fully formed debut that delivers in spades. The hooks are there, the blend of the synthetic and organic is impeccable, the production is frequently gorgeous, with every single intentional fracture, and with the writing that can both set the scene and cut to the feeling. In a just world, this album would make her a superstar. I mean, call it pop, call it rock, call it alt country or Americana or everything in between. Bullseye lived up to its title. 9 out of 10, one of the best albums of 2021. It's gonna wind up slept on. You should hear it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know this is a little bit late and probably won't get all the traffic that it should, but seriously, you want to check this album out. It is something special, and give it some time to really let it sink in. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or get albums on my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there. Once again, please don't feel obligated. Tough times, I understand, but the option's available. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.